I was at my wedding eve party when my wife declared, "I've decided we need a prenuptial agreement. Everything stays separate." I grinned, thinking, perfect timing. You know those moments when you're sitting there, feeling pretty damn good about yourself, thinking life's finally clicking into place. Yeah, well, hold on to that feeling because mine lasted about as long as a TikTok video. There I was, decked out in my $1,000 tux that made me look like James Bond's cooler, younger brother, surrounded by 200 of our closest friends and relatives in the swankiest ballroom money could rent in downtown Chicago. The chandeliers were sparkling like diamonds, the champagne was flowing like water at Niagara Falls, and everything was picture perfect for what was supposed to be our engagement party. The whole setup screamed, "We've made it." You know? White tablecloths that probably cost more than most people's car payments, centerpieces that looked like they belonged in a museum, and enough flowers to make a florist weep tears of joy. Claire had insisted on the works. Because apparently, when you're announcing your engagement, you can't just throw some chips and dip on a folding table in someone's backyard like normal people. No, we had to go full Kardashian with this thing. My best man Marcus was standing there with that shit-eating grin he gets when he's about to embarrass me in front of everyone I've ever met. The guy had his champagne flute raised high, ready to launch into what I knew was going to be a 20-minute roast session about every stupid thing I'd done since we were roommates in college. I'm talking about the time I tried to impress a girl by claiming I could speak French and ended up ordering a hamburger by asking for beef circle with happy sauce. Real smooth, right? The whole crowd was buzzing with that pre-speech energy, you know? People were settling into their chairs, phones already out, and ready to capture whatever humiliating stories Marcus was about to unleash. My mom was sitting at the front table with that proud but slightly terrified look mothers get when they know their son's about to be publicly roasted. My dad was already chuckling into his whiskey, probably remembering his own engagement party disasters. But then, and I swear this is where everything went from romantic comedy to psychological thriller, Claire decided she had something to say first. My beautiful, blonde, perfectly put together fiancée stood up in her designer dress that probably cost more than my first car, grabbed her champagne glass, and started clinking it with her engagement ring. The sound cut through the chatter like a fire alarm at 3 a.m. "Excuse me, everyone," she announced with that smile that I used to think was charming but was starting to remind me of a shark who'd just spotted a wounded seal. Before Marcus starts telling embarrassing stories about my wonderful fiancée, I have a little announcement of my own. The room went quiet faster than a library during finals week. Even the waitstaff stopped moving, probably sensing that whatever was about to happen was going to be more entertaining than anything they'd see on Netflix later. Marcus lowered his glass, looking confused, like someone had just told him that beer was actually bad for you. Claire cleared her throat dramatically, and I mean dramatically, like she was about to deliver a soliloquy at Shakespeare in the Park. "I've been thinking a lot about our future together, and I've decided that we need to be practical about things. We need a prenuptial agreement. I believe everything should stay separate. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. It was like someone had hit the pause button on the entire universe. My cousin Jerry, who'd been in the middle of decimating the shrimp cocktail station, literally froze with a jumbo shrimp halfway to his mouth, looking like a confused statue of a guy about to eat seafood. I sat there holding my champagne glass, feeling like I'd just been sucker punched by a kangaroo wearing boxing gloves. The rational part of my brain was trying to process what had just happened, while the other part was wondering if there was a hidden camera somewhere, because this had to be some kind of elaborate prank. I mean, who drops a prenup bombshell at their own engagement party? It's like announcing you want a divorce at your wedding reception. But here's the thing about me, I don't stay shocked for long. Call it a defense mechanism, call it stubbornness, call it whatever you want, but when life throws me a curveball, I swing for the fences. So after about 10 seconds of sitting there like a deer in headlights, I started grinning. Not a happy grin, mind you, but one of those slow, knowing grins that usually means someone's about to get what's coming to them. "Well," I said, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "That's one hell of a way to kill the party vibe, babe." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, but most people were still trying to figure out if they should start looking for the exits or pull out their phones to record what was obviously about to become the most talked about engagement party in Chicago history. Claire's smile faltered just a little, like she hadn't expected me to take it quite so well. She probably thought I'd stammer and apologize and agree to whatever she wanted, like I usually did when she dropped one of her practical suggestions on me. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had my own little surprise tucked away, and her timing was absolutely perfect. See, Claire had been showing her true colors for weeks now, dropping hints about financial security and making sure I understood that her family's money was off limits while somehow expecting full access to mine. I'd been paying attention, taking mental notes, and preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Because if there's one thing I learned from my old man, it's that when someone shows you who they really are, you better believe them the first time. So I kept grinning, raised my glass a little higher, and prepared to show everyone in that fancy ballroom exactly what happens when you try to play games with someone who's been 3 steps ahead the whole time. Little did Claire know, her perfect prenup announcement was about to become the opening act for my own little performance. And trust me, mine was going to be a lot more memorable than hers. Claire wasn't done with her little performance. Oh no. She was just getting warmed up like a pitcher in the bullpen. She started pacing around our table in that calculated way that told me she'd rehearsed this whole speech in front of her bathroom mirror about 50 times. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor with each step, creating this rhythm that sounded like a countdown timer to disaster. Now, I know this might sound unconventional, she continued, gesturing with her champagne glass like she was conducting an orchestra of financial independence, but I really believe that modern couples need to be smart about these things. We need to protect our individual assets and maintain our financial autonomy. She was using her corporate lawyer voice now, the one she pulled out when she wanted to sound sophisticated and intimidating at the same time. The crowd was eating this up like it was the season finale of their favorite reality show. I could see people leaning forward in their chairs, phones discreetly recording, probably already composing the text they were going to send to their friends about the wildest engagement party they'd ever witnessed. My Aunt Martha was fanning herself with her napkin, like she was about to have the vapors, and Uncle Rick was shaking his head with that kids these days expression he reserved for particularly stupid news stories. But here's where Claire's brilliant plan started showing its true colors. She kept talking about financial separation and independence, painting herself as some kind of feminist icon who was breaking down traditional relationship barriers. Real progressive stuff, right? Except then she started explaining the house situation, and that's when her whole, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours philosophy suddenly developed some very convenient exceptions. Of course, we'll still be moving forward with purchasing our dream home together, she announced with the kind of confidence that comes from believing your own bullshit. Because that's an investment in our shared future. What's important is that we approach it as equal partners, building something beautiful together. She was really laying it on thick now, talking about partnerships and equality while essentially describing a scenario where I'd be writing checks, and she'd be picking out curtains. The house she was talking about was this gorgeous Victorian place in Lincoln Park that we'd been looking at for months. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, original hardwood floors, and a price tag that would make a lottery winner think twice. We'd put in an offer 2 weeks ago, and I'd already transferred my half of the down payment, a cool 50 grand, into our joint account, ready for the closing. Claire knew this, of course, because she'd been tracking every penny like a forensic accountant. What she didn't know was that I'd been doing some tracking of my own. See, I'd started noticing things over the past few weeks. Little comments here and there about how her family's money was tied up in investments and couldn't be touched for something as mundane as real estate. How her parents had advised her to keep her assets protected because you never know what might happen in a marriage. How she'd started referring to the house as ours, while making it crystal clear that her BMW, her savings account, and her trust fund were definitely, absolutely, 100% hers and hers alone. So while she was standing there explaining her revolutionary approach to modern relationships, I was sitting there thinking about the phone call I made yesterday afternoon. The one to my financial advisor, good old Bob Murphy, who'd helped me set up my investment portfolio back when I got my first real job. Bob had been confused when I asked him to pull $50,000 out of our joint account and transfer it back to my personal checking. But he'd done it without asking too many questions. That's why I pay the guy the big bucks. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Claire wanted to play the separation game. Game on, sweetheart. Let's see how separate she wanted things to get when her brilliant house buying plan suddenly had a $50,000 hole in it. I let her finish her speech about financial autonomy and modern partnerships, watching as she worked the room like a politician at a campaign rally. She was good, I'll give her that. She had most of the crowd nodding along, probably thinking she was some kind of visionary who was revolutionizing the institution of marriage. A few of the younger women were looking at her with genuine admiration, like she'd just invented sliced bread and Wi-Fi at the same time. When she finally wrapped up her presentation and raised her glass for a toast to new beginnings and honest partnerships, I knew it was time to bring the thunder. I stood up slowly, straightening my bow tie and giving her my most charming smile, the one I used to use in college when I was about to deliver a comeback that would leave someone speechless for a week. "That's really beautiful, Claire," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear but calm enough to sound completely reasonable. "I love how passionate you are about keeping everything separate and independent. It shows real commitment to your principles. She beamed at me like I'd just told her she was the most brilliant woman who'd ever lived. Poor thing had no idea what was coming. In fact, I continued, pulling out my phone with the casual confidence of someone who held all the cards. I'm so inspired by your dedication to financial separation that I decided to get a head start on the whole thing. Since you want everything to stay completely separate, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, right? I went ahead and pulled my money from the house deposit yesterday. The silence that followed was so profound it was like someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Even the background music seemed to stutter and die. The band in the corner, who'd been playing some smooth jazz number, hit such a wrong note that it sounded like someone had dropped their saxophone down a flight of stairs. Claire's face went through about 17 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. First confusion, then realization, then the kind of horror you see in movies when someone realizes the call is coming from inside the house. Her jaw dropped so fast I was worried she might dislocate something, and her champagne glass tilted dangerously in her suddenly limp grip. But the real show was happening at the parents' table. Her dad Gregory, who'd been sipping his top-shelf whiskey with the smug satisfaction of a man whose daughter had just played a brilliant financial chess move, suddenly started choking like he'd swallowed a golf ball. Her mom Diane went pale as a sheet, probably doing the mental math on what this meant for their precious daughter's Pinterest-perfect wedding plans and real estate dreams. If you've ever wanted to see what happens when a perfectly choreographed plan crashes and burns in spectacular fashion, you should have been sitting at my table that night. The fallout from my little announcement hit the room like a tsunami of awkwardness mixed with pure, unfiltered chaos. It was beautiful in the way that train wrecks are beautiful. Horrifying, but absolutely impossible to look away from. Diane was the first to recover from the shock, and let me tell you, she came back swinging like a mama bear whose cub had just been told Santa wasn't real. Her face went from ghostly pale to fire engine red in about 2 seconds flat, and she shot up from her chair so fast you'd think someone had attached rockets to her Louboutin heels. The woman looked like she was ready to climb across the table and personally strangle me with the fancy cloth napkins. "That's absolutely heartless," she hissed, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a chainsaw through butter. "How could you do something so cruel to your own fiancé? On your engagement night, no less." She was clutching her pearls, and I mean literally clutching her pearls, because apparently that's something rich people actually do when they're having a meltdown. Her perfectly styled hair was starting to come undone, little wisps escaping from whatever industrial strength hairspray she used to keep that helmet in place. Gregory decided to join the party next, and man, this guy went full alpha male faster than you could say toxic masculinity. He leaned across the table toward me with this intimidating glare that probably worked wonders in boardroom negotiations, but just made him look like an angry walrus in a tuxedo. The veins in his forehead were popping out like a roadmap to Stroke City, and his whiskey glass was shaking in his grip. "You listen here, young man," he growled, pointing his finger at me like he was casting some kind of rich dad curse. "You can't just pull a stunt like this and think you're going to get away with it. Do you have any idea what kind of position you've put our daughter in? What kind of man does something like this?" Meanwhile, Claire was having her own little breakdown right there in front of God and everybody. She looked like someone had just told her that her credit cards had been canceled, her Instagram account had been deleted, and her favorite coffee shop had permanently run out of pumpkin spice. The poor thing was staring at me with this expression of complete and utter betrayal, like I'd just told her that everything she'd ever believed about the world was a lie. "You can't do that," she wailed, her voice cracking like a teenager whose parents just took away their phone. "That's our house. We put in an offer. We have contracts. You can't just take your money back like that." She was gesturing wildly with her hands now, champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her glass, threatening to christen her expensive dress with some premium Dom Perignon. Now here's where things got really fun, because I'd been prepared for exactly this moment. I pulled out my phone with the calm confidence of someone who'd just played the perfect ace in a high-stakes poker game, scrolling through my emails until I found exactly what I was looking for. The confirmation from my bank, timestamped at 3:47 p.m. the previous afternoon, showing the withdrawal of $50,000 from our joint account and the transfer back to my personal checking. "Oh, but I can," I said, holding up my phone so the whole table could see the screen. "See, that's the beautiful thing about having your name on an account. You get to decide what happens to your money. And according to this little email right here, my money is now sitting safely in my personal account, earning me a nice 4.2% APY while it decides what it wants to be when it grows up." The reaction was immediate and spectacular. Gregory's face went through several shades of purple that I didn't even know existed in nature, while Diane started making these little gasping noises like a fish out of water. Claire just stared at the phone screen like she was trying to will the numbers to change through sheer force of her gaze. But the real entertainment was happening in the peanut gallery. The other guests had given up all pretense of polite conversation and were now openly gawking at our little family drama like it was the season finale of their favorite reality show. Half the room was suddenly very interested in getting fresh drinks from the bar, probably hoping to get close enough to hear every juicy detail. My Uncle Dave leaned over to his wife and whispered something that made her snort with laughter so hard she nearly choked on her champagne. $10 says he's sleeping on the couch tonight. I heard someone mutter from the table behind us, which honestly made me laugh out loud because they had no idea how wrong they were. At this point, I wasn't planning on going home with Claire at all. My buddy Marcus had already offered me his guest room if things went sideways, and from where I was sitting, we were well past sideways and heading straight into upside down territory. The best part was watching Claire's friends try to process what was happening. These were the same women who'd been gushing over her brilliant prenup strategy just minutes earlier, talking about how smart and independent she was for protecting her assets. Now they were sitting there with their mouths hanging open, probably wondering how their financial guru had managed to outsmart herself so spectacularly. A few of them were already pulling out their phones, no doubt preparing to text their other friends about the absolute disaster they were witnessing firsthand. Tara, one of Claire's bridesmaids, looked like she was caught between wanting to comfort her friend and wanting to disappear into the floor. She kept glancing between Claire's devastated face and my triumphant grin, probably trying to figure out if there was some way to salvage this situation or if she should just start planning damage control for the morning. The wedding photographer, who'd been snapping away happily during Claire's speech, had quietly lowered his camera and was backing away from our table like he was retreating from a crime scene. Smart man, he probably recognized that these weren't the kind of memories anyone was going to want in their wedding album. Even the waitstaff had stopped pretending to be busy and were openly listening to our conversation while they refilled water glasses and cleared appetizer plates. I caught one of them giving me a subtle thumbs up when Gregory wasn't looking, which honestly made my night even better than it already was. You know what's funny about dramatic confrontations at fancy parties? They don't actually resolve anything. They just set the stage for the real fireworks that happen over the next few days. And let me tell you, the aftermath of my little financial revelation was like watching a soap opera written by someone who'd had way too much caffeine and a personal vendetta against happy endings. The first thing that happened after our engagement party from hell was that I started getting phone calls. Not the "hey, great party, thanks for the entertainment" kind of calls, but the "what the hell did you just do and how do we fix this emergency summit" kind of calls. Claire's mom Diane was blowing up my phone like I owed money to the mob, leaving voicemails that started sweet and reasonable and progressively got more unhinged with each attempt. But here's the thing that really started to piss me off. It wasn't until Tara, one of Claire's bridesmaids and apparently the only person in that whole crew with half a functioning brain cell, accidentally spilled the tea that I realized just how deep this rabbit hole of manipulation actually went. We ran into each other at Starbucks 2 days after the party, and she looked like she hadn't slept since the whole thing went down. "I feel so bad about everything," she said, fidgeting with her Vinny whatever the hell it was with extra foam and 17 different flavor shots. I mean, I knew Claire was stressed about the money situation, but I didn't think she'd actually go through with it. Then she paused, looked around like she was about to confess to a murder, and dropped the bomb that explained everything. Turns out Claire had been bragging to her little girlfriend squad for weeks about how she'd found the perfect solution to her financial security concerns. She'd figured out a way to get me to bankroll the house purchase while keeping all of her family's money safely tucked away behind the legal fortress of a prenup. According to Tara, Claire had actually used the phrase, "personal bank with a tuxedo," when describing me to her friends, which honestly should have hurt my feelings, but was so ridiculous that I just started laughing. The master plan, as Tara explained it, was beautifully simple in its pure, unadulterated greed. Claire would spring the prenup on me at the engagement party, knowing I'd be too embarrassed to make a scene in front of everyone we knew. Then, with her assets legally protected, she'd graciously allow me to fund our shared investment in the house, which would somehow magically become community property while everything else stayed locked away in her personal financial fortress. She kept saying how smart she was, Tara whispered, glancing around the coffee shop like Claire might materialize out of thin air to hear her confession. How she was getting the best of both worlds, security and a nice house that she wouldn't have to pay for. The girl looked genuinely sick as she said it, probably realizing she'd been friends with someone who viewed relationships as elaborate financial schemes. Well, this bank had some news for its would-be customer. The loan department was permanently closed for business. Without my $50,000, Claire's brilliant house buying strategy had about as much chance of success as a chocolate teapot. The sellers weren't exactly thrilled about losing half the down payment 2 weeks before closing, and the real estate agent was making noises about contract violations and potential legal complications. But the real comedy gold came when Claire tried to get the money together on her own. Turns out all that talk about financial independence and separate assets was a lot easier when someone else was picking up the tab. Her first stop was her own bank, where she strutted in with the confidence of someone who'd never actually tried to get a mortgage by themselves. The loan officer, a middle-aged woman named Susan, who probably dealt with delusional house hunters every single day, listened politely to Claire's explanation about needing to secure financing for a $600,000 house with her $30,000 annual salary from her part-time marketing consultant gig. Susan nodded thoughtfully, asked some very reasonable questions about income verification and debt-to-income ratios, then delivered the kind of reality check that should have come with its own soundtrack. "Well, Ms. Thompson," Susan said with the professional courtesy of someone who was about to crush dreams for a living. "Based on your current financial profile, we could potentially approve you for a mortgage of approximately $120,000, assuming you have excellent credit and can provide a 20% down payment." She slid a pamphlet across the desk titled, "First-Time Homebuyer Resources," with the kind of smile you give to children who've just asked if they can buy a pony with their allowance money. Claire's second attempt involved her parents, which led to the kind of family meeting that usually ends with someone getting written out of a will. Gregory and Diane, who'd been so supportive of their daughter's financial independence at the party, suddenly developed a case of selective amnesia when it came to actually writing checks. Apparently, all that family money was tied up in investments and couldn't be liquidated without significant tax implications. What they really meant was that they'd been counting on me to be their daughter's personal ATM, and now that the machine was broken, they were fresh out of solutions. Gregory actually had the balls to call me directly, suggesting that maybe we could work out some kind of compromise, where I'd put up the money now, and we'd sort out the legal details later. I told him I'd rather invest my money in lottery tickets and magic beans. At least those had better odds of paying off. The best part was watching Claire's social media presence during this whole meltdown. She went radio silent for about a week, which in Instagram influencer time is basically like disappearing into witness protection. When she finally resurfaced, it was with a series of vague posts about learning who your real friends are and staying strong through difficult times, accompanied by pictures of inspirational quotes overlaid on sunset photos. Her comment section became a battlefield between people who knew what had actually happened and her remaining supporters who thought she was going through some kind of mysterious personal crisis. My favorite exchange was between her college roommate, who wrote, "Stay strong, girl. You deserve so much better." And my cousin Jerry, who replied, "Yeah, she deserves someone dumb enough to pay for her house." The comment got 43 likes before Claire deleted the entire post. Monday morning rolled around like it always does, way too early and with way too much attitude. I was sitting in my office at Peterson & Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm downtown, trying to pretend I cared about quarterly projections and client retention rates while secretly reliving the absolute masterpiece of chaos I'd orchestrated at Saturday night's engagement party. My coffee was still hot, my computer was booting up with its usual morning grumpiness, and I was feeling pretty damn good about life in general. That peaceful morning vibe lasted exactly 37 minutes. I was deep in an email thread about some client's obsession with changing their logo for the 15th time this month when Jenny from reception called my extension. "Hey, there's a gentleman here to see you," she said, and I could hear the uncertainty in her voice like she wasn't quite sure if gentleman was the right word to use. "He says he's your future father-in-law, Gregory Thompson. He seems intense." Oh, this was going to be good. I told Jenny to send him back, then sat back in my chair and prepared for what I knew was going to be either the most entertaining or most uncomfortable conversation of my week. Given how Gregory had handled Saturday night's festivities, I was betting on a combination of both. The man who walked into my office looked like he'd aged about 10 years since the engagement party. His usually perfect silver hair was slightly mussed, his expensive suit was wrinkled like he'd slept in it, and he had that wild-eyed look that people get when they've been drinking too much coffee and not getting enough sleep. He didn't wait for an invitation, just marched right up to my desk and planted himself in the chair across from me like he was settling in for a hostile takeover. "We need to talk," he announced, leaning forward with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "Right now? About what you did to my daughter and what you're going to do to fix it." I took a sip of my coffee and gave him my most professional smile, the one I usually reserve for clients who were about to fire us but still owed money on their account. "Good morning to you too, Gregory. How's the family handling everything? Everyone sleeping well?" That was apparently the wrong thing to say, because Gregory's face went from stressed-out dad to full-blown angry bull in about 2 seconds flat. He slammed his hand down on my desk so hard that my coffee mug jumped and my keyboard rattled like it was having a seizure. "Don't you dare sit there acting smug with me, you little shit," he roared, loud enough that I was pretty sure the entire floor could hear him. "You embarrassed my daughter in front of 200 people. You ruined their investment plans. You made our entire family look like fools. His voice was climbing in volume with each accusation, reaching levels that would have made a drill sergeant proud. By now, my coworkers were starting to peek over their cubicle walls like prairie dogs sensing danger. Sarah from accounting was openly staring with her mouth hanging open, probably wondering if she should call security or start recording for her TikTok account. Mike from the design department had abandoned all pretense of working and was leaning back in his chair to get a better view of the show. "Gregory," I said calmly, still sipping my coffee like we were discussing the weather. "The only investment you should have made was in teaching your daughter basic math. See, when someone says, 'What's mine is mine, what's yours is yours,' that generally includes the part where my money stays with me. It's a pretty simple concept, really." This did not improve Gregory's mood. If anything, it made him angrier, which I didn't think was physically possible. He stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall, then started pacing around my office like a caged tiger with a business degree in anger management issues. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he snarled, spinning around to point an accusatory finger at me. "You think you can just humiliate my family and walk away like nothing happened? Well, let me tell you something, buddy. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. We're not going to let you get away with this." "Get away with what, exactly?" I asked, genuinely curious about what crime he thought I'd committed. "Managing my own finances? Making decisions about my own money, following your daughter's brilliant advice about keeping everything separate." That's when he really lost it. Gregory started yelling about family loyalty and commitment and responsibility, throwing around phrases like moral obligation and breach of trust, like he was some kind of relationship lawyer presenting his case to a jury of angry in-laws. He was gesturing wildly with his hands, his face getting redder by the minute, and occasionally stopping to wipe sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief that had probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. The whole performance was so over the top that I started wondering if someone was pranking me. I mean, this was the same guy who'd been nodding approvingly when his daughter announced her prenup plan, right? The same guy who'd been talking about protecting family assets and being practical about money? Now he was in my office having a meltdown because I'd taken his advice a little too literally. By this point, we'd attracted a proper audience. Ginny from reception had wandered back to see what all the shouting was about, and she was standing in my doorway with her eyes wide like she was watching a really dramatic episode of her favorite soap opera. Tom from HR was lurking nearby, probably trying to figure out if this constituted a workplace incident that required official documentation. My boss, Patricia, chose that exact moment to walk by my office. She's this no-nonsense woman in her 50s who's seen every kind of workplace drama you can imagine, from office affairs to embezzlement scandals to that time someone brought their emotional support peacock to the company picnic. She paused in my doorway, took in the scene of Gregory gesticulating wildly while I sat calmly drinking coffee, and raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Everything okay in here?" she asked in that tone that suggested she was about 5 seconds away from calling security and having Gregory escorted from the building. "Just having a friendly family discussion," I replied cheerfully. Gregory here was just explaining some interesting theories about financial responsibility and moral obligations. Very educational stuff. Gregory whipped around to face Patricia, probably thinking he'd found someone who might take his side in this whole mess. "This man," he declared dramatically, "has destroyed my daughter's future. He's ruined everything we've worked for. He's what?" Patricia interrupted, and her voice had that icy edge that made junior associates break out in cold sweats. "He's managing his own money? Making his own financial decisions? Because from where I'm standing, that sounds like exactly what a responsible adult should be doing." That shut Gregory up faster than a power outage at a karaoke bar. Tuesday morning brought a new player to this absolutely ridiculous game of financial chess that my life had become. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop downtown. You know, one of those hipster places where they charge $8 for a latte and the baristas all look like they're auditioning for an indie film about the struggles of millennial existence. When Tara slid into the seat across from me, like she was conducting some kind of covert CIA operation. Poor Tara looked like she'd been chosen for the world's worst diplomatic mission. Her usually perfect makeup was a little smudged, her hair wasn't quite as bouncy as usual, and she had that deer-in-headlights expression that people get when they've volunteered for something they immediately regret. She was clutching a vanilla oat milk macchiato with extra foam like it was a security blanket, and she kept glancing around the coffee shop like she expected Claire to burst through the door at any moment. So she began nervously, stirring her drink for the 15th time even though it was already perfectly mixed. "Claire wanted me to talk to you. You know, woman to woman. Well, woman to man. You know what I mean." She was babbling, which was never a good sign in a negotiation. When someone starts a conversation by explaining that they don't know what they mean, you can pretty much guarantee that whatever follows is going to be pure gold. I leaned back in my chair and gave her my most encouraging smile. The kind you use when you want someone to feel comfortable enough to say something spectacularly stupid. I'm all ears, Tara. What's on Claire's mind these days? Besides the obvious financial crisis and public humiliation, I mean. Tara winced like I just reminded her that Santa Claus wasn't real. She feels really bad about how everything went down at the party, she said, which was already a fascinating start because feeling bad about getting caught is very different from feeling bad about what you actually did. She knows things got a little heated and she wants to find a way to work things out. You know, like adults. Adults. I repeated, taking a sip of my coffee. Right? Because announcing a prenup at your own engagement party, and then expecting your fiancé to fund your real estate dreams, is definitely how adults handle relationships. She's willing to compromise, Tara said quickly, like she was ripping off a band-aid. She's been thinking about it a lot, and she realizes that maybe she came on a little strong with the whole separation thing. She wants to find a middle ground that works for both of you. Now this was getting interesting. I've been wondering how long it would take for Claire to realize that her brilliant financial independence strategy had one tiny flaw. It required her to actually be financially independent. Turns out the answer was about 4 days, which honestly was longer than I'd expected. The girl was nothing if not optimistic about her ability to bend reality to her will. I'm listening, I said, because when someone's about to offer you a deal that's guaranteed to be insulting, you might as well let them dig their own grave nice and deep. Tara took a deep breath like she was about to deliver a speech at the United Nations. Okay, so here's what she's thinking. She still believes that the prenup is important for both of your futures, you know, to protect everyone's interests and make sure things stay fair. But she also recognizes that you two are a team, and teams need to work together on big investments like houses. I nodded thoughtfully, like this was actually making sense instead of sounding like someone trying to explain why water flows uphill. Go on. So she's willing to share some things, Tara continued, gaining confidence as she warmed up to her pitch. Like, she'd be happy to put you on her Netflix account, and she's got Spotify Premium, so you could share that too. And she's thinking about upgrading to the Hulu plan without commercials, which she'd totally be willing to share with you. I sat there for a moment, waiting for the rest of the offer. When it became clear that Tara was actually finished, I had to ask, I'm sorry, did you just offer me streaming service privileges in exchange for $50,000? Tara's face went bright red. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds completely insane. I suggested helpfully. She's also willing to let you pick the restaurant for date nights, Tara added desperately. Like this was the game-changing sweetener that would seal the deal. And she'd be open to alternating who pays for gas when you take road trips together. I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle or a diplomatic smile, but actual, full-blown laughter that made the other coffee shop patrons turn to stare. A couple of college students at the next table stopped pretending to study and started openly eavesdropping, probably wondering if they were witnessing some kind of performance art piece about modern relationships. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said, wiping tears from my eyes. Claire wants me to put $50,000 into a house that she'll own half of, while keeping all of her money safely protected behind a prenup. And in exchange for this generous opportunity to fund her real estate portfolio, she's offering me. What? Access to her Disney Plus account. It's not Disney Plus, it's Hulu, Tara corrected weakly. Like this was somehow an important distinction in the context of a $50,000 transaction. Oh, my mistake. Hulu. That changes everything. I pulled out my phone and pretended to do some quick calculations. Let's see. Hulu without commercials is what, $12 a month? So over the course of a 30-year relationship, that's, carry the one, about $4,000 in streaming value. What a bargain. I'd only be paying roughly 12.5 times the market rate for commercial-free television. Tara looked like she wanted to disappear into her oat milk macchiato. She's also really good at picking movies, she offered pathetically. I'm sure she is, I said still grinning. Tell me, did Claire actually think this was a reasonable offer? Or did she send you here as some kind of social experiment to see how insulted I could get before my head exploded? She really thinks you two can work this out, Tara mumbled, not meeting my eyes. She says she loves you and wants to build a future together. A future where I pay for everything and she owns half of it while keeping her money locked away like it's Fort Knox, I clarified. But hey, at least I'd get to watch The Handmaid's Tale without commercial interruptions. What girl wouldn't want a deal like that? The poor barista behind the counter, a kid with a man bun and gauged ears who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, had been trying not to listen to our conversation but was clearly failing miserably. When I caught his eye, he gave me a subtle thumbs up and mouthed. Run, dude, Run. Wednesday morning brought the kind of entertainment that you just can't get from cable television or Netflix originals. I woke up to about 17 text messages from various friends and family members, all basically saying the same thing. Dude, you need to see what Claire posted on Instagram. Nothing gets you out of bed faster than the promise of watching someone commit social media suicide in real time. I grabbed my phone and coffee, settled into my favorite chair, and prepared for what I knew was going to be either the most pathetic or most hilarious thing I'd see all week. Claire had been radio silent on social media since the engagement party disaster, which in influencer time is basically like going into witness protection. When someone who normally posts 12 times a day about their green smoothies and yoga poses suddenly disappears, you know they're either dead, in rehab, or planning something spectacularly stupid. Turns out it was option 3. The post was a masterpiece of victimhood and manipulation, complete with one of those carefully staged photos where she looked vulnerable and brave at the same time. You know the type, slightly messy hair that took 2 hours to perfect, minimal makeup that actually required more products than her usual full glam look, and that wistful stare into the distance that suggested deep thoughts and inner strength. The caption was pure gold, dripping with the kind of self-righteous indignation that only someone who'd been caught red-handed could muster. Sometimes life teaches us hard lessons about the people we trust most, she'd written, because apparently subtlety wasn't in her vocabulary anymore. Someone had even created a side-by-side comparison of her strong, independent woman posts versus her complaints about not getting access to my money. One particularly savage commenter wrote, "Imagine announcing you want to keep everything separate, then throwing a tantrum when your partner actually keeps things separate. The audacity is astronomical." That one got over 100 likes in the first hour. The really beautiful part was watching Claire try to defend herself in the comments. She kept responding with things like, "You don't understand the full situation and this is about partnership, not money." But every response just made her look more desperate and delusional. It was like watching someone try to put out a fire with gasoline. My cousin Jerry, bless his completely unfiltered soul, had found the post. More desperate and delusional, it was like watching someone try to put out a fire with gasoline. My cousin Jerry, bless his completely unfiltered soul, had found the post and left a comment that made me laugh so hard I snorted coffee out of my nose. Translation: I wanted his money but not his opinions. How dare he have boundaries and self-respect? Doesn't he know I'm entitled to his wallet because I'm pretty? The post was getting shared and screenshot faster than gossip at a high school reunion. I watched the like count drop steadily as more people saw it and realized what they were actually reading. Claire was getting roasted harder than a marshmallow at a Boy Scout campfire, and she seemed genuinely surprised that people weren't buying her victim narrative. About 2 hours after the original post went live, Claire started damage control. She posted a follow-up trying to clarify her position, but it just made things worse. "I never said I wanted his money," she wrote, which was immediately contradicted by people posting screenshots of her text messages to friends where she'd literally called me her personal ATM. Then came the Instagram stories, a series of increasingly frantic videos where she tried to explain her side of the story. Each one was more desperate than the last, with Claire getting more emotional and less coherent as she went on. She kept talking about miscommunication and misunderstandings, but you can't really misunderstand someone announcing a prenup while expecting you to buy them a house. The final nail in the coffin came when one of her own friends, I think it was Jessica from her yoga class, left a comment that basically destroyed what was left of Claire's credibility. "Girl, you literally told us you found the perfect way to get him to pay for the house while keeping your money protected. We all heard you say it. Multiple times." That comment got deleted within minutes. But the internet is forever, and people had already screenshotted. The damage was done. By noon, Claire had deleted the original post entirely, but it was way too late. Screenshots were circulating on Twitter, TikTok, and probably every group chat in the greater Chicago area. Someone had even turned it into a meme with the caption, "When you want equality, but only the profitable kind." My mom, who'd been following the whole saga with the enthusiasm of someone watching her favorite soap opera, called me around lunchtime. She was laughing so hard she could barely speak. "Son," she said between fits of laughter, "I've been a family court judge for 25 years, and I've never seen someone destroy their own case so thoroughly. It's like she wrote a confession and posted it on a billboard." Thursday rolled around like the grand finale of a really twisted reality show, and Claire's parents decided it was time to bring out the big guns. I'm talking full corporate presentation mode, complete with PowerPoint slides, and what I can only assume was a strategy they'd borrowed from some business school textbook about hostile takeovers. They'd apparently spent the last few days crafting what they probably thought was an offer I couldn't refuse, and they were ready to present it with all the confidence of people who'd never actually been told no in their lives. The meeting took place at some upscale restaurant downtown, The kind of place where they charge $30 for a piece of fish the size of a credit card and the waiters act like they're doing you a personal favor by bringing you water. Gregory and Diane had commandeered a private dining room, complete with a projector setup that made the whole thing look like a board meeting between people who'd watched too many episodes of Shark Tank. I showed up fashionably late, partly because I wanted to make them sweat and partly because I was genuinely curious about what kind of insanity they'd cooked up. Claire was already there, looking like she'd rather be literally anywhere else, fidgeting with her jewelry and avoiding eye contact like a teenager who'd been caught sneaking out past curfew. "Thank you for coming," Gregory said with the forced enthusiasm of a used car salesman trying to move inventory before the end of the month. "We really appreciate you taking the time to hear us out." He gestured toward a laptop connected to a small projector. And I kid you not, the first slide read, "Building a Future Together, a Strategic Partnership Proposal." A strategic partnership proposal for a relationship between people who were supposedly in love. Diane took over for slide 2, which was titled Win-Win Financial Framework. She launched into this whole spiel about how they'd analyzed our respective contributions and developed a fair and equitable distribution model that would maximize value for all stakeholders. I felt like I was in a business meeting about merging two companies, except one of the companies was apparently my wallet and the other was their daughter's real estate ambitions. The third slide was where things got really interesting. It was a pie chart, an actual pie chart, showing the proposed ownership structure for our future house. According to their brilliant mathematical analysis, I would contribute 62% of the down payment, closing costs, and monthly mortgage payments, while Claire would contribute 38%. In return, we'd each own exactly 50% of the property. "Now, I know what you're thinking," Gregory said, clearly not knowing what I was thinking at all. "But this isn't as uneven as it appears. Claire brings significant non-monetary value to the partnership." He clicked to the next slide, which listed things like interior design expertise, property management skills, and lifestyle enhancement. Value to the partnership. He clicked to the next slide, which listed things like interior design expertise, property management skills, and lifestyle enhancement. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud. Lifestyle enhancement? The woman once tried to microwave a salad because she thought it would make the vegetables more nutritious. Her idea of property management was calling me whenever a light bulb burned out. But they weren't done. Oh no, they had backup slides. Diane pulled up a comparison chart showing market rates for interior design services, personal shopping, and household management, assigning dollar values to activities that Claire would theoretically perform as part of our partnership. According to their calculations, her contributions were worth approximately $28,000 annually, which somehow justified the lopsided financial arrangement they were proposing. The beauty of this model, Gregory explained with the confidence of someone who'd convinced himself that 2 + 2 = 5, is that it recognizes both financial and non-financial contributions while maintaining the separate asset protection that Claire values so highly. That's when I finally spoke up. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," I said, leaning back in my chair and giving them my best "are you serious right now" expression. "You want me to pay 62% of everything related to the house, but I only get to own 50% of it. And in exchange for this generous opportunity to overpay for real estate, Claire will occasionally pick out throw pillows and remember to water plants." Claire finally looked up from her plate. "You're being deliberately obtuse," she said, which was rich coming from someone whose mathematical skills apparently topped out at calculating Instagram engagement rates. "This is about recognizing different types of value in a relationship." "You're right," I replied cheerfully. "It is about recognizing value. For instance, I value not being treated like a human credit card with a pulse. I value financial arrangements that make sense in the real world, not in whatever alternate dimension you three have been living in." The room went quiet except for the soft hum of the projector, which was probably overheating from the sheer stupidity it had been forced to display. Gregory and Diane exchanged glances like they were trying to telepathically figure out where their brilliant presentation had gone wrong. That's when Claire decided to go for the emotional manipulation angle. "You embarrassed me," she suddenly exploded, loud enough that I was pretty sure the other diners could hear her through the supposedly soundproof walls. "You humiliated me in front of everyone I care about. You made me look like a fool." I set down my water glass and looked at her with what I hoped was a perfectly calm expression. "No, Claire. I didn't embarrass you. You embarrassed yourself when you decided to treat me like an ATM with a bow tie. You humiliated yourself when you announced a prenup at our engagement party while expecting me to fund your real estate dreams. You made yourself look like a fool when you thought I'd be stupid enough to fall for this whole charade." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. Diane started making those little gasping sounds that rich women make when they're not getting their way, and Gregory looked like he was calculating whether assault charges would be worth the satisfaction of throwing his dinner roll at my head. But the real drama was just getting started, because that's when the engagement ring situation finally came to a head. Claire had been conspicuously not wearing it since the engagement party, and when I asked about it, she got this shifty look that immediately put me on high alert. "I think we should return it," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Under the circumstances, it doesn't seem appropriate for me to keep it." Which would have been reasonable, except when she finally produced the ring 2 days later, something was very, very wrong. See, I'm not the kind of guy who normally notices details about jewelry, but when you spend 3 months' salary on something, you tend to remember what it looks like. And the rock sitting in that little velvet box looked about as real as Claire's commitment to financial equality. The diamond was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Not, maybe the light is hitting it differently, wrong. But completely, obviously. This came from a vending machine at the mall wrong. The brilliant cut stone I'd carefully selected had been replaced with what looked like a piece of glass that someone had found in a parking lot. Let me tell you something about people who think they're smarter than everyone else. They usually end up being their own worst enemy. Claire's little diamond swapping scheme was about as subtle as a fire alarm in a library and about twice as obvious to anyone with half a functioning brain cell. When I confronted her about the fake rock she'd tried to pass off as my 3-month salary investment, she went through all 5 stages of grief in about 30 seconds, ending up somewhere between denial and bargaining. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, which would have been more convincing if she hadn't been sweating bullets and avoiding eye contact like a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar. "That's the same ring you gave me. Maybe you're remembering it wrong." "Wrong move, sweetheart." "Eye contact like a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar. That's the same ring you gave me. Maybe you're remembering it wrong." "Wrong move, sweetheart." See, unlike some people, I actually keep receipts for major purchases. When you're buying something that costs more than most people's cars, you tend to get proper documentation. I pulled out the original appraisal from the jeweler, complete with detailed photos and specifications of the stone, and watched Claire's face go through more color changes than a chameleon having an identity crisis. "This says 1 carat, vs 1 clarity, E-color grade," I said, holding up the paperwork like I was presenting evidence in court. "What you just handed me looks like something you'd find in a Cracker Jack box. So unless my diamond magically transformed into costume jewelry overnight, somebody's got some explaining to do." That's when her lawyer training finally kicked in, and she started backpedaling faster than a unicyclist going downhill. Turns out she'd had the stone cleaned at some sketchy jewelry shop that had apparently mixed up the stones, or maybe there had been a break-in, or possibly the original jeweler had made a mistake, or any one of about 17 different excuses that all boiled down to, "It definitely wasn't my fault and you can't prove anything." But here's the thing about trying to scam someone who's already caught you red-handed. It's like trying to convince a cop you weren't speeding while your car is wrapped around a telephone pole. I called my lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Rebecca who specialized in making problems disappear faster than free pizza at a college dorm, and explained the situation. "Theft charges," she said without hesitation. "Doesn't matter if she was engaged to you or not. You gave her a specific item to wear, not to pawn. This is textbook conversion of property, and if she doesn't produce the real ring within 48 hours, we file with the district attorney." The magic happened faster than a David Copperfield show. Within 6 hours of Rebecca making her phone call, Claire's parents were blowing up my phone like telemarketers during dinner time. Suddenly the ring had been found. Apparently it had been at another jewelry store getting a security setting check and there had been some kind of miscommunication about which ring was which. Funny how these miscommunications always seem to resolve themselves when felony charges start getting mentioned. But Claire wasn't ready to give up on her house hunting dreams just because reality kept getting in the way. Friday afternoon, she showed up at my apartment complex with her parents and a real estate agent in tow, carrying a stack of property listings like she thought this was some kind of HGTV show where persistence and delusion eventually pay off. I was up on my balcony, enjoying a beer and watching the sunset, when I spotted the little invasion force marching across the parking lot. Claire was gesticulating wildly at the agent, probably explaining how this was all just a big misunderstanding and I'd definitely be interested in looking at more houses once I came to my senses. "Hey there, future homeowner." The agent called up to me with the kind of aggressive enthusiasm that real estate people use when they smell commission money. "Your lovely fiancé tells me you're looking for a property in the Lincoln Park area. I've got some fantastic options that just came on the market." That's when I decided to have a little fun. "Oh, we're not engaged anymore." I called down cheerfully. Turns out she wanted a business partner, not a husband. And since I'm not in the business of funding other people's real estate portfolios, we decided to part ways. But thanks for stopping by. The agent's smile faltered like a car running out of gas. And she started backing away from Claire like she'd just discovered she was contagious. Nothing kills a real estate agent's enthusiasm faster than realizing their client has exactly zero buying power and even less credibility. But Claire, bless her persistently delusional heart, decided this was the perfect time to double down on stupid. She marched right up to the main entrance of my building and started buzzing other apartments, trying to get someone to let her in so she could come upstairs and continue this conversation in person. That's when I called building security. Because at this point, we'd moved from awkward breakup into potential stalking territory. The security guard, a no-nonsense guy named Marcus who dealt with his share of domestic drama, showed up faster than pizza delivery on Super Bowl Sunday. "Ma'am, do you live in this building?" he asked Claire with the kind of professional courtesy that security guards use right before they call the police. "I'm visiting my fiancée," she replied, which was technically true if you counted showing up uninvited with a real estate agent after committing petty theft as a normal social visit. "And does your fiancé want you here?" Marcus asked, glancing up at me on the balcony. "Absolutely not. I called down. In fact, I'd prefer if she stayed about 50 miles away from here. Minimum." That's how Claire, her parents, and their unfortunate real estate agent got served with trespass notices faster than you could say property values declining. The neighbors who'd gathered on their balconies to watch the show started applauding like they'd just witnessed the final scene of a really satisfying movie. Mrs. Henderson from 3B shouted down, "Better than anything on Netflix," which honestly made my whole week. But the universe wasn't done delivering justice yet. Oh no, karma was just getting warmed up for the main event. Remember that $30,000 that Claire's parents had gifted her for the house down payment? The money that was supposed to be her contribution to our shared investment? Well, it turns out that when parents give their adult children large sums of money, the IRS has some very specific opinions about how that should be handled. See, there's this thing called gift tax that rich people usually know about, except apparently Gregory and Diane had been too busy planning Claire's financial independence to consult with their accountant. When you give someone more than the annual exclusion limit, which in this case was about $15,000, you're supposed to file some paperwork and pay some taxes. They hadn't done either. So when Claire tried to deposit that $30,000 into her personal account, the bank flagged it as a large cash transaction and reported it to the IRS, as banks are required to do. And when the taxman looked at Claire's financial records and saw a $30,000 deposit that wasn't reported as income or properly documented as a gift, they decided to have a little chat with her about her tax obligations. Gift tax, income tax, penalties, and interest. The $30,000 her parents had given her suddenly became a $40,000 problem that made my withdrawal of the house money look like pocket change. You know what's funny about watching someone's entire world crumble? It's like watching a really slow-motion train wreck where the conductor keeps making the same mistakes over and over again, except the conductor is wearing a designer dress and has a trust fund. Claire's response to her mounting financial and legal problems was to dig her heels in deeper and pretend that if she just ignored reality hard enough, it would eventually bend to her will. The wedding venue situation was pure comedy gold. We'd booked the Palmer House downtown for what was supposed to be our dream wedding. You know, the kind of over-the-top celebration that costs more than most people's annual salary and requires a full-time coordinator just to manage the flower arrangements. Claire had spent months planning every detail, from the custom linens to the 7-course tasting menu that required 3 separate food allergies to be accommodated. When I called to cancel our booking, the wedding coordinator, a supremely professional woman named Sandra, who'd probably dealt with her share of relationship disasters, was very understanding about the whole situation. "These things happen," she said diplomatically. "We'll process the cancellation and refund whatever deposits are refundable according to your contract." But Claire had other ideas. Apparently, she'd decided that the wedding was still happening, with or without me, and she was going to find some way to make it work. Maybe she thought I'd cave under pressure, or maybe she was planning to hire a stand-in groom from Craigslist, but either way, she refused to sign the cancellation paperwork. So there I was, getting phone calls from Sandra asking me to clarify whether we were actually canceling or not. While Claire was apparently calling the same office insisting that it was all just a temporary misunderstanding, that would be resolved shortly. That's when Claire made her next brilliant strategic move. She sent me an invoice. Not a request, not a suggestion, but an actual invoice for half of the wedding venue deposit, itemized and everything, like I was some kind of vendor who owed her money for services rendered. Shared financial responsibility for wedding expenses, the invoice read, as discussed in our prenuptial agreement negotiations. Which was hilarious, considering we'd never actually signed a prenuptial agreement, and the entire reason we were in this mess was because I'd refused to fund her real estate dreams while she kept her money locked away in her personal Fort Knox. I forwarded her the screenshots of her own text messages. The ones where she'd explained her brilliant, "what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours" philosophy, along with a note that said, "As per your own stated policy regarding financial separation, please consider your wedding expenses to be entirely yours. Thanks for playing." The venue ended up canceling the booking when Claire couldn't produce either my signature on the cancellation form or my credit card to cover the remaining balance. Another $16,000 down the drain, which honestly should have been a wake-up call about the cost of trying to manipulate people who are 3 steps ahead of you, but the real entertainment came from watching Claire's social media evolution during this whole period after her disastrous strong independent woman post got turned into a meme. She'd gone quiet for a while, probably hoping everyone would forget about her spectacular public humiliation. When she finally came back online, it was with a completely new narrative that was somehow even more delusional than the original. Now she was posting inspirational quotes about toxic masculinity and financial abuse, painting herself as some kind of feminist warrior who'd been victimized by a man who couldn't handle her success and independence. She shared articles about narcissistic partners and red flags in relationships, apparently unaware that she was describing her own behavior with startling accuracy. My personal favorite was her post about men who use money as a weapon to control women, which got absolutely roasted in the comments by people who remembered her trying to use my money as a weapon to buy herself a house. The cognitive dissonance was so strong you could practically see it radiating from her Instagram feed like heat waves off hot asphalt. Meanwhile, her dating profile updates were pure gold. She'd apparently decided that the solution to her current problems was to find another guy, preferably one who was financially stable and generous, but also respectful of strong women. Basically, she was shopping for ATM 2.0, but this time with better marketing. Her bio read like a wish list for a sugar daddy disguised as feminist empowerment. Looking for a real man who understands that supporting your partner's dreams is what love looks like. Must be emotionally mature, financially secure, and ready for a serious commitment. No games, no cheapskates, no men intimidated by successful women. The translation was pretty clear: wanted, rich guy dumb enough to pay for my lifestyle, while I lecture him about equality. As for me, well, let's just say that dodging this particular bullet felt better than winning the lottery and finding out you don't owe taxes on it. I spent the weekend going through all the wedding gifts we'd received early from eager relatives, returning the ones that came with receipts, and donating the rest to charity. The crystal vase set from Aunt Gertrude found a new home at Goodwill, right next to the matching his and hers coffee mugs that had Mr. Right and Mrs. Always Right printed on them. I took the money I'd saved from not buying Claire's dream house and reinvested it in my retirement accounts and a nice diversified portfolio that was already up 8% since I'd made the switch. My financial advisor Bob was practically giddy when I called to tell him what had happened. "Son," he said, "you just saved yourself about $500,000 in future headaches. That woman would have bankrupted you by 40. My mom, retired family court judge and dispenser of brutal honesty, summed up the whole situation perfectly over Sunday dinner. She didn't want a husband, honey. She wanted a sponsor. There's a big difference between a life partner and someone who pays for your life." The best part was how much better I slept at night. No more lying awake wondering if I was being manipulated or taken advantage of. No more walking on eggshells around someone who viewed every conversation as a potential negotiation. No more pretending that what's mine is mine, what's yours is ours, was somehow a reasonable relationship philosophy. I'd learned my lesson about spotting red flags early, and let me tell you, Claire had been waving more red flags than a communist parade. The prenup announcement at our own engagement party should have been my cue to run, but better late than never, right? Now I was free, financially secure, and armed with one hell of a story that made me the most popular guy at every party I attended. Nothing breaks the ice quite like telling people about the time your ex-fiancée tried to turn you into her personal bank and ended up getting audited by the IRS instead.